So we go from that to Gnosticism. After a couple of weeks of intro, this week we finally take a look at our first heresy, which may well be the best known, at least by name, since many of its texts and beliefs were not unearthed until the 20th century. Gnosticism is a heresy more people have heard about than some of the others. Its newly discovered texts bear names of people we know from the Bible and have been brought to the public eye by great scholars like Elaine Pagels and others. And since Gnostics, at least some of them, believed Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene, and best-selling author Dan Brown took that idea to the bank in the Da Vinci Code, Gnosticism has had its contemporary viral moments, so you may have heard of it more than some of the other things we will talk about. But while it has many Christian forms, Gnostic ideas predate the birth of Jesus by several centuries. It's not just a Christian thing. Its specific origins are largely unknown. Some think it came out of Buddhism, others trace it to the thinking of Plato and Pythagoras as filtered through the Hellenistic Jewish community of Alexandria in Egypt, and maybe a little of all of that. But, as we'll see in a bit, their beliefs made them ripe for Christianity when it emerged and was trying to figure itself out. The bishops of the early church spoke out against Gnosticism frequently, but it wasn't until the church teamed up with the enforcement mechanisms of the Roman Empire that there was really a way for the church to go after them. But once that was in place, they were hunted almost to extinction by the 5th century. Both before and after that, however, in times and places where people have been allowed to debate religious ideas freely, Gnosticism has flourished in a variety of forms. The word Gnostic, G-N-O-S-T-I-C, comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge. The belief that earned a variety of related ideas the name Gnostic is the claim that they possess secret knowledge, gained only by initiation into a Gnostic community. Set that against Jesus sitting among thousands of people on a hillside to spread his teaching out in the open, no strings attached, and you can already see where there might be some disconnect. But we humans have always been enticed by secret knowledge. It's what got Adam and Eve in trouble in the first place. It's the lure of conspiracy theories. Here's what's really happening. It's how Scientology ensnares people. Pay up and we'll give you the secrets. Oh, those are just the beginning secrets. It's going to cost you more to get the deeper secrets, and on and up it goes until you've got Hollywood's A-list paying a fortune for, anyway, don't do that. Of course, there's the allure of being in an elite group who know things that others don't. But also, in a world where there actually are conspiracies and groups that operate in the shadows to the benefit of some and the detriment of others, I think we can be forgiven for our survival instinct that really wants to know as much as possible about the world around us. If a panther's gonna drop on me from a tree unseen, I'd like to know that ahead of time. You have secret glasses that will let me see danger I otherwise couldn't see, or give me benefits that I otherwise couldn't have. We all feel the pull to buy those glasses, to eat that fruit. But what did the Gnostics actually believe? What were the contents of those secrets? What did Christians find so disturbing about them? I want to start, this gets in kind of in the weeds, but let's start with their cosmology, which is the way you see the larger universe. God, heaven, how the earth was made, that big picture stuff. On the one hand, the Gnostic image of heaven isn't all that different from what the Bible gives us. Besides a singular almighty God, Christians have angels and archangels and seraphim and cherubim and a wild assortment of other heavenly beings, which if they appeared at our door would have us calling either the police or animal control. I'm not sure which. If you read the book of Revelation, they're all there. And that's before you add Jesus, whose heavenly appearances Christians describe differently before and after his life on earth. And although you have to piece it together from several different places, the story is not in all one place. You have Satan at God's staff meeting in the book of Job, and the story of a fallen angel named Lucifer later on. There is a similar menagerie in the Gnostic heaven, but with a twist. The God above it all in Gnosticism is totally unknowable. Like Christian and Jewish depictions of God, the Gnostic God is light, but that light in Gnosticism pulses out, with bits of divine light breaking off and entering into other heavenly beings who happen to be there. And those other heavenly beings are called aeons. One of those aeons, called the demiurge, arises from those lesser beings, and it's that demiurge who creates the world. But the demiurge is kind of like a Lucifer character, a divine being in the heavenly realms, but also a problem. The Gnostic demiurge is at best incompetent and at worst evil. As a result, some of the divine sparks pulsing around in the heavens either get spilled in the Gnostic version where the demiurge is incompetent, or purposefully trapped in the evil version into the created order. You know, it's like spilling something else that you didn't intend into your cookie dough. It's not supposed to be there. As best I understand it, and I am not a great scholar of these things, I'm just trying to work it out, but as best I understand it, those sparks of the divine were not supposed to be infused into actual matter, physical stuff. And the Godhead gets splintered as a result. It was only meant for spirit, for divine beings. So that makes the end game of salvation for the Gnostics to free all those sparks of the divine, to return to the realm of spirit where they belong and where they never should have left in the first place. For the Gnostics, material reality, all things in creation that we can touch and see and hear and smell and taste, are obstacles at best, or cages for those little sparks at worst. Some Gnostics believe they have no real existence at all physical, that there isn't really physical matter, that it's all an illusion. And riding across the top of all of those beliefs, which exist along a spectrum, is the binary idea that what is material is bad and what is spiritual is good. And that those two things are not supposed to be mixed together. The benefit of having a creator of the material world be either a clumsy or a malevolent semi-deity is that you never have to ask why there's evil in the world or why bad things happen. If everything was created by a screw-up or a cruel being, instead of a good and loving God, you have a very easy answer to that thorny question. So there are some benefits to those beliefs. But while Genesis gives us an account of the one and only God, placing God's own image into human beings as a gift, Gnostics see the divided and encased sparks in physical bodies as a cleanup challenge at best and an injustice that needs to be righted, a spirit freed from its cage at worst. The God of Genesis forms humanity from the literal dirt. The name Adam means red earth. For the Gnostics, that core Christian and Jewish idea is a grave insult to both God and humans. And let's talk about those spark-carrying humans for a moment. The Gnostics had a three-tiered caste system for humanity. Every human being was placed in one of three categories ranked from best to worst. The best humans they called pneumatics, from the Greek pneuma, like pneumonia, lungs, breath, spirit. The spiritual ones. The pneumatics were the ones who were fully initiated into Gnostic teaching. They were best because, having fully absorbed the secret knowledge, they knew themselves to be immaterial, without a real body, and thus their knowledge, their gnosis, allowed them to escape the doom of the material world. And that, for Gnostics, was salvation. Below the pneumatics were the psychics. They were partially initiated. They were true spirits, but still held that silly belief that there actually existed real flesh and blood bodies. They weren't spiritual per se, but they gave them the moniker of soulful. In this layer of Gnostics, you find the ones responsible for the branches of Gnosticism that move into the occult, and there are quite a few of those. But most famously with Madame Blavatsky, the Russian-American mystic who co-founded the Theosophical Society in 1875. Then, on the very bottom rung of human existence, were the Hylics, which is a Greek word that roughly translates to made of wood. These were people who were entirely concerned with the material world and saw themselves as fully physical and part of it. The Gnostics believed the Hylics were simply incapable of ever understanding the gnosis, and therefore they were unable to be saved. Don't even bother with the Hylics, those wooden people. They're never gonna get it. When you start separating the material and the spiritual worlds, and worse, setting them in opposition to each other and ranking human worth according to whether or not they agree with you, a number of problems crop up. Many Gnostics lived an ascetic lifestyle, and there's nothing wrong with that. Many of the 7 deadly sins articulated by the Catholic Church come about because of runaway bodily appetites, sloth, gluttony, lust, etc. And living a life that seeks to tame bodily excess is one way that Christians throughout time have sought to ensure that they are in control of their bodies and not the other way around. But if you are adopting an ascetic lifestyle, because you believe your physical body is inconsequential at best and an enemy to your spirit at worst, pretty soon you're going to be open to the idea that your body and your health don't matter. And if it isn't just you, if any material body is worthless or even non-existent, you'll have no concern for the bodies of anybody else either. If bodies don't matter, there is no need to feed the hungry or clothe the naked, at least not for their sake. And if the material world is not only of lesser value than the spiritual world, but an actual problem to be overcome, you're not going to be worried about the well-being of the non-human world either. It's all just a temporary, illusory vehicle to help us find and nurture the trapped sparks so that we can all be free of this material burden, and if we get rid of it sooner rather than later, then so much the better. You are not likely to find any full-on Gnostics out trying to save the planet. nor will you find them serving in soup kitchens, hospitals, or any kind of social justice movement, or any other endeavor whose mission is to alleviate bodily suffering or prevent the degradation of the material world. Neither the Gnostics who believe matter is evil, nor the Gnostics who believe matter is illusory, are going to help preserve any of it, human or otherwise. Why would they? A key point in this sermon series is that our core beliefs affect our behavior, at least over time. What we believe may be buried deep in our subconscious. We may never have thought about its implications. But over time, anyone who watches what we do will come to understand what we believe, even if we don't even understand it ourselves. And it's not a huge leap from matter is evil to convincing yourself that inflicting material suffering or environmental destruction is actually the righteous thing to do, to move people along to their salvation and the world to its ultimate end in the spiritual reunification of spirit. All of that stuff is standing in the way of salvation, deluding those dumb Hylics into thinking that they are in any way real. Get rid of it and let them see the Spirit shine forth, devoid of its material trappings. To my mind, all of that is incompatible with a loving God. To be fair, Gnostics believed that the highest order of the divine was totally unknowable. So a loving God, in any sense that Jews or Christians would recognize, wasn't really a Gnostic belief in the first place. They were consistent in their system. In their view, God didn't even make the world, let alone love the world. And any bit of divinity that got into it was either a mistake or a prank. Now take all of that and apply it to what Christians believe about Jesus and the central witness of all four gospel accounts of his death and resurrection. If material bodies are evil, then Jesus would never choose a human body as a dwelling place. Jesus, as both human and as fully human and fully divine, which is the paradox that Christianity teaches, has no place at all in that worldview. The only element of the divine that Gnostics would acknowledge in Jesus is that divine spark that either got in by accident or was trapped in Jesus the man by an evil being. When considering Jesus and the claims of the Gospels about him, the Gnostics did put Jesus in the top order of beings, the pneumatic, because he recognized his spiritual essence. In their view, he allowed his body to be beaten, tortured, and even killed without objection, because it was either beneath him or only illusory, and the resulting freedom of his true spirit is what that group would call resurrection. Related to all that is a different but related heresy that denies not just a bodily resurrection, but even Jesus' death. It's called Docetism. Docetism doesn't just deny Jesus' death. It teaches that Jesus' body was never more than an illusion in the first place, a phantasm of some kind that only appeared to suffer and die and be resurrected, but that wasn't real at all. Another form of Docetism said that there was a physical body belonging to a man named Jesus, but that the spiritual being Christians worship only entered into Jesus when the dove came down at his baptism and then exited in the seconds before his death on the cross when Jesus says, "Into thy hands I commit my spirit." So the divine Jesus doesn't die in that view, even though the human Jesus does. And of course, all of that made the question of a bodily resurrection and ascension moot if there was actually no body to begin with. Remembering that the physical existence of material things was a real question for Gnostics is helpful when dealing with the "was Jesus married" question, at least as they framed it. Because marriage and all of the physical intimacy that goes along with it were metaphors and symbols for most Gnostics. To the extent that bodies existed, they were not celebrated. And in most cases, they were at least mostly illusion. Now, that's all too simplistic, and it exists on a spectrum of belief, but all of it is related to the idea that physical matter is impure, and thus incapable of containing the divine. It's that duality of matter versus spirit that characterizes Gnostic belief in its various forms. And when applied to Jesus, it's what got tossed them into the heretical pool by Christians. There are certainly brands of Christian and Jewish mysticism that can come close to some of those kinds of thoughts. Mystics of every major religion I'm aware of describe ultimate enlightenment as the experience of feeling that we are all one with God, that unity of spiritual presence. Many people report various kinds of out-of-body spiritual experiences that suggest body and spirit can at times be separated. We even sing hymns about mystical union with God. But where Christianity and Judaism differ from Gnostic belief is that the Christian sense of oneness with God includes the material world, our bodies, and for many, all of the created order. God made it, not some lesser being, and what God has made is sanctified, not demonized. It is gift, not burden, the vehicle for meeting and knowing God, and therefore for salvation, not an obstacle that the process of salvation has to overcome. For Christians, whatever spark of the divine that exists within human beings is the manifestation of what Genesis calls the image of God, a place within us in love, placed within us in love and on purpose to help us in our vocation to serve and protect the earth. Whatever you think about Gnostic ideas, you can see why the church had a problem with them. I picked the passage from 1 Corinthians 15 to go with all of this, because I think you can hear some of Paul, Jewish Pharisee that he was, arguing with the Jewish Gnostics of his day here. But you can also hear things that seem quite supportive of Gnostic positions, which you can find a lot of in John's Gospel too. But listen again to 1 Corinthians 15, the first couple of verses that Kathy read. But someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body do they come? Fool, what you sow does not come to life unless it dies. Especially given that strong rebuke from Paul, it sounds like he's talking to those on the end of the Gnostic spectrum who had come to believe that Jesus was resurrected in some way, but did not die. But then a few verses later, in verse 51, Paul says, we won't all die, but we'll all be changed. Thank you, Paul. In verses 42 and 43, the Gnostics can also find some support. So it is with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown is perishable, what is raised is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. That sounds kind of like the body is of lesser importance than the spirit, maybe even dishonorable. Then in verse 44, Paul makes what I think is a subtle turn. It is sown a physical body, it is raised a spiritual body. If there is a physical body, there is also a spiritual body. Thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam, narrator here, he means Jesus, became a life-giving spirit. But it is not the spiritual that is first, but the physical, and then the spiritual. The first man was from the earth, a man of dust. The second man is from heaven. As was the man of dust, so are those who are of the dust. And as is the man of heaven, so are those who are of heaven. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we will also bear the image of the man of heaven. What I am saying, brothers and sisters, thank you, is this. Flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Listen, I will tell you a mystery. We will not all die, but we will all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. For this perishable body must put on imperishability, and this mortal body must put on immortality. When this perishable body puts on imperishability, and this mortal body puts on immortality, then the saying that is written will be fulfilled, death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? I'm not going to pretend that Paul is easy to understand. Even Peter complains in 2 Peter 3:16 that understanding Paul is a tall order. I had professors like that. I swore some of them were paid by the syllable. But as best I can tell, in this passage that is so often read at funerals and without which Holy Week would have no music, Paul is, I think, trying to say that the material world is both good and a necessary precursor to the spiritual. In his metaphor here, our bodies are the seeds that give birth to our spirit, not a cage from which our spirits must be freed. No seed, no actual body. Guess what? No spirit. Without the physical thing to plant, you're not going to get the flower or the tree or whatever. The spirit is the mature growth of the seed, which means that the full nature of the spirit has to exist within that seed in the first place. Not as an enemy, not as a mistake, but as the essence that makes the seed of a human life uniquely what it is. Paul talks about our bodies being changed, not kicked aside in disgust, not discarded, changed. The mortal becomes immortal. The perishable becomes imperishable. The Christian witness is that the Word became flesh in Jesus, who then took it to the limit, blew through the limit, until the seed broke open and became spirit in resurrection. The water didn't just suddenly taste like wine. It became wine. It became wine. The Christian witness is a witness of bodily transformation, not spiritual realization or the stripping of an illusion. And because that transformation is an act of love on God's part, not the acquisition of secret knowledge on ours, there is no lower order of human that lies outside the bounds of God's salvation. Paul is also clear in his letter to the church in Rome that the message of God's salvation is in no way secret, but is evidenced freely to every person through the material world in the created order that God has made. Romans chapter 1, verse 20, quote, "Ever since the creation of the world, God's eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things that God has made." Close quote. For millennia, well before the life of Jesus, human beings have been aware that there is a world of things we can experience with our senses, things we can see, touch, hold, nurture, destroy, taste, use, whatever. But humans have also recognized that there is also an intangible reality. Things that have been called personality, consciousness, memory, soul, spirit. And that those intangibles can somehow be shared with other humans, and to varying degrees with life outside our own. Every religious system I know of has grappled with what to make of that awareness of body and spirit. And in every Philosophy 101 class, you will be invited to try to prove that your body actually exists, that you are not a figment of a cosmic imagination or some character in a dream. Now, I remember that class. Look at your hand. Can you prove to me that that hand isn't just dreamed up by something? Nope. No, you can't. These are universal questions, and Gnosticism is one way of answering them. Christians agreed with Jews that the tangible and intangible both fully exist, but in balance, not in opposition. That God gifted us with both material and spiritual realities, and that both are fully real, good, holy, and necessary. And then Christians went one step further to claim that in Jesus, God gave us an example of what that perfect balance looks like. Fully human and fully God at the same time. Claiming that by following Jesus' teaching and example, we too can find that balance. As a result, upon our death, we don't experience destruction, but transformation. The sacred seed of our bodies breaks open into its mature form, our tangible lives transformed from perishable to imperishable, from mortal to immortal. Now, you might believe that, or you might not. But as best I understand it, that's the essence of the Christian witness. And it's what I personally believe. Your mileage may vary, but I encourage you to think about your own beliefs. We talk easily these days about body, mind, and spirit, and how all of that relates to health and all the rest. But what do we mean by those words? Where does the body end and the mind begin, given that we have this physical gray matter in our heads? How is all of that related to spirit? Where is it? Can we locate it? What do we mean by those things? Is God infused in all of them? In any of them? In some of them? In times when you've fallen short of being your best self? Is it your body, your mind, or your spirit that's tripped you up? Is perfection possible? Oh wait, sorry, that's next week. Amen.